Just wait. Let's see. Where's it going? Hi, Kim.
And she has, Kim, are you there?
I'm here.
Hi, Kim.
Hey.
Hello, folks.
Alrighty. Well, we are off and running, so I will just get us going and call the meeting to order. If Pete drops in, we'll make sure to add him. Yeah, we'll be spending most of the time talking about the Chasebrook management plan. Have a couple things to run through real quick, but I don't think it'll take us a lot of time before we get into Chasebrook. And the first of those is just to welcome Kim to the mission. Thanks for jumping in.
Thank you.
One thing we didn't, I don't know, Andrew, if you've had conversations that we didn't really talk about is how the different Conservation Commission members tend to take on different aspects of the work. And I don't know if you've had an opportunity to think about any of that, and whether there's particular aspects of what we're doing that you want to be more engaged in.
Okay. I'm willing to take on what is needed. I'm good at writing things up fairly quickly, that kind of stuff. Sorry, sitting outside the house. I just got booted instead of a cast. I'm now in a boot for 6 weeks. So slight improvement.
Yeah.
But I'm happy to write things up. What do you guys need? Let's put it that way.
Well, we just finished the summer newsletter, so we'll have a fall newsletter coming up later. Not that we have any grants that we're going for right now, but I think we know who our go-to person might be for that going
I will
forward.
happily do that.
Yeah.
And we do have separate minutes and all of that. Have you thought about whether you want to continue? I know how much you.
And not defer to AI. AI is, yeah, we can talk about that. If you're interested in a secretarial position.
I could. I am the world's worst typist, like on the spot, but I could do that.
Okay, well, we can, if there's things that come up that pique your interest or you wanna ask more questions, don't hold back.
Okay.
Or have some other conservation related, ideas
Yeah,
that you don't see already that we're talking about.
Okay, great.
I will not be harassing you about knotweed, I promise.
any more than.
We could use a Sherville expert.
And we do have coming up, right, the wildlife corridors work, so that's something
Yeah.
Okay.
I get involved with.
Keep your eye on things that interest you and let us know.
Yeah,
And thanks for the offer to do writing, because it's always helpful.
Yeah,
for
Will do.
sure.
Once I'm a little more mobile, I'm happy to help with the knotweed and other stuff. But for right now, I'm going to be gimpy for a little while.
Yeah,
All right. Well, the next thing is just to approve the minutes from May. Let's have a chance to take a look at those.
I move that we approve them.
I second.
All in favor?
I
Aye.
Alrighty. One more bit of admin before Chasebrook. Banners and
So I don't have another version yet.
Mhm.
Is in our emails, were you all in agreement that it might make sense to have all three if it doesn't look like ridiculously crammed?
the three.
Fayston, Waitsfield, Warren.
yes.
Yeah, I think there's a place for that.
Okay, all
When
right,
when
so,
all three of you are coordinating around the same projects.
all right, So I will
Mhm.
have time next week to put that together and then I'll share it to you all and then to Frank,
Yeah.
Okay.
That works.
Yeah, I think it's a great idea.
For our
And
tabling, for knotweed,
collaboration.
because
Yeah.
that is a tri-town effort. At CRB, that would, that a tri-town banner would be
Oh,
appropriate
yeah.
there
Yeah.
at the Green Valley Rally.
And then when one of the commissions isn't part of something, you just put a big white poster in front of that part of the
Right.
banner.
Yeah.
Alrighty. Great, so we're good with that for now then. Chase Brook Management Plan update, so this is the majority of the meeting,
Oh,
so.
wait.
So I'd probably turn it over to Michael and Amy and Kai with your history.
Yeah,
Michael, I'm not a current member of the Conservation Commission, but I'm a longtime member since he started it back in 2007.
Okay,
So I've worked with the original management plan. I'm just trying to help these guys sort through things and history. And,
yeah, that's great.
yeah,
he knows Chase Brook very intimately,
Okay,
which is great.
cool.
so have you had any specific questions about things that you've done over the, since 2006 too? I'm happy to.
Okay, well, yeah, it might be good then, I don't know if you looked at the plan, but maybe like some of the history stuff and. It might be good if you chimed in on that,
Yeah,
cause obviously no management's happened for a while. But you guys obviously like the boundary posting and, yeah, I don't know what else you've done, so
yeah,
if you guys want that stuff in the plan, that'd be good to. Glean all that information from you,
yeah,
or you can just, yeah, I could switch this to. We did it in Moortown, I usually just use, like Microsoft products, but if it's easier for people, I can put it on. Like a Google Doc,
Hmm.
if that's easier for people to, like, depending on how you wanna edit or look at it, or. You can also just say like on page.
Google
25.
Doc would be helpful to me.
He seems to
Okay.
be more Google driven, he seems to be more Microsoft.
Mm,
Either works
But-
for me.
Yeah, either works for me,
Okay.
but. If we're.
Google works for me because I'm not technologically savvy well, and
Yeah,
the one thing that I've
Right.
gotten my hands a hold of and.
Well, definitely okay, so I can put it on there and then, but yeah, it kind of messes with the formatting, so then maybe like any edits.
Uh-huh.
That maybe you have specifically, I'll just pull them off and do them like manually.
Sure,
Is
as long as there's something I can view and just comment by text or email based on what I get to see, then it's all good.
Yeah, or.
Yeah, whatever makes it easiest for you too.
Yeah, I mean, I can do any of the, cause like if you.
Yeah, I don't need to do internal editing necessarily, I don't think, not
Okay,
on this one.
gotcha. Okay,
Yeah, so I don't really have much more to say because you guys all got this. Not long ago, and there's 70 some odd pages, so it's a lot to read through and absorb. But I think just getting an overview from you tonight and. Flagging any areas in the plan that might be worth our. Noting and
Right.
paying attention to in terms of, how this. How we're charged by Vermont Land Trust to address. Ongoing management considerations.
right,
Actions that have happened and should continue to happen going forward and. Relevant changes because of climate and disease, we just heard on the radio, I'm sure we all heard on the radio of it. Beach, what is it, beach
Leaf
disease,
disease, yeah.
a real threat to beach trees.
yeah, I don't think it's right around here, I was seeing something that I thought was beach leaf disease.
Mhm.
But then like, my phone told me it was something else, I can't remember what it was, but. And it didn't look exactly like it, cause
Mhm.
beach leaf disease kind of like strikes the leaf. So I don't think it's here, but yeah, it will be eventually, or I think they expected it would like show up a lot more places this summer.
Right,
I don't even know how quickly it moves,
right.
but,
We have it at our property.
okay, so yeah, it is around here, okay.
I've been seeing a lot of curling beech trees and younger.
Yeah, see, that's what I was seeing, and I think that's something different, it might be like an aphid or a mite or something.
Yeah.
Because the beach leaf disease, it doesn't really like curl the leaf, but it like changes the color, kind of like in
Mhm.
bands. Cause it like changes the veins on the.
Between the veins kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. So like makes the smaller veins almost like just turn into bigger veins, I think,
Mhm.
or kind of blows them out or something. But, okay, but so I guess I'll just jump in first on the length. And we did it in Moretown, but then I think we undid it. Is like there is a lot of like background and boilerplate in this. And I left it in, but a lot of that can come out if you guys wanted like a more concise document for people to look at. So that's just one thing, right? I think we peeled a bunch of that out in the Moretown plan, just because we were like, well. People can figure this out somewhere else, just to try to keep it a little bit shorter.
Mhm.
Maybe keep the citations in there, so they know where to access it, people know where to access. it.
Yeah, I mean, the appendix would stay in
Yeah.
the back with like terms and references and stuff, but I mean, just like there's a lot of. Like habitat types, you
Mhm.
know, and like what is succession, you know, and there's a lot of that type of stuff in there. That's just kind of I start with, and so. That's something that we can easily peel out or peel out sections if you guys are like, okay, yeah, people just need to know this or need to go find their own background info.
Mhm.
So, so in, right, so you have the VLT easement and you have the Catamount Trail, corridor, and then the Chase Brook crossing, so I didn't prescribe any harvesting. Really because of the Chase Brook crossing, and we can always change it, but. You know, if the town wanted to do some management, it's more than feasible. But it would be a lot simpler to go through an abutter to the east. Instead of trying to cross the brook. It is possible, but like I think I emailed back and forth with you some, it's a cost. And then there's obviously some ecological impact, because you have to put in a temporary bridge and kind of like set abutments, and it's a whole thing. So.
Landing zone.
Right, the landing zone would be probably by the barn, you know, and that can get cleaned up, but it's really more like the bridge is like a pretty big, that's a pretty big brook to cross, and it's possible. But, and I know obviously the town like wouldn't be looking to make money on a project, right? It's like to do forest management and create diversity and increase habitat and. But with a bridge, it might just make it harder to make it not a net negative,
Right,
if that makes sense.
yes.
Are
So,
there management options for address, maybe I should, if you wanna hold off on this question, please do, but. Looking at even age stand areas,
Mhm.
and I can't remember the different blocks and which ones were perhaps a little bit more even aged. But if one was to want to create a more diverse habitat in that area for ecological purposes, are there manners in which to get in there don't really entail significant, like just basically walking around with chainsaws or not pulling in big machinery that requires issues crossing a brook or
right,
The removal.
right,
no-
yeah,
And
no,
letting it fall and decay and.
right. Did you stay to the end at the, okay, so I mean, that's essentially what they did, right?
yeah, they just dropped it.
They just dropped it. I mean, so then that's still a cost.
So this is the Pratt Refuge for this, where they had, it was a big, it was a 5 acre, it was pretty big.
I think it's 2
Oh,
acres.
2 acres,
Yeah.
okay, but a big clearing where they just dropped all the trees. And so they're all there, you know,
Nothing was removed,
it's like no, it's just all,
pick up sticks.
yeah.
Is that the succession section that they're
Well,
working on having a?
Yeah, I mean, I
50-year
think they were just,
rotation?
like, that's a pretty young area, or that's maybe like a 40-year-old area on that forest, and so. They were just trying to create like a brand new group for early successional habitat. And start to, I mean, before that VLT on that, there was commercial work done. That had some groups put in, but they're just trying to create a little more uneven aged habitat.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's more than feasible, but then there's still a cost associated with it.
Yeah,
And then I don't think that towns can apply for NRCS funding. I don't, right, because sometimes you can get like NRCS grants to cover work like that. Can find out for sure, but I didn't think towns could. But,
I know.
Okay.
Did Max Popowitz do that cutting in there?
he did, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, because then he kind of caretakes that property and is right there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Have you been up there since they did that work?
I haven't seen it personally, no.
Yeah.
Sounds like a great idea, though.
Yeah,
And I'm kind of, my head's all over the place because I'm really just trying to get a sense of, at the end of the day, what are the management recommendations that perhaps the commission, if we came to a consensus or agreement on management recommendations that we would want to be pushing forward for approval after the public has commented and we've gone through that draft review, and then we have a plan that we're pushing towards approval from the select board. What, I don't have a good sense, and certainly speaking for myself, I am familiar with ecology at a very lay level, public level, like, so, I have no sense of how, and maybe this is hard, but because it's a judgment thing, but how important over the next 10 years, with the forests the way they are, is intervention of some sort if the goal is for a more ecologically healthy forest. So maybe it costs money, and that's something over 10 years that the commission is trying to raise funds for, because we identify it as a very important element to Chase Brook's ecological health, to provide these services for birds and all the other things. But I have no sense of, I guess, like the value of doing work that might be costly. If it's just for ecology and there's not a timber operator that's gonna make money because they're pulling timber out. Do you have, I don't even know if that's a fair question to ask.
yeah, no, and the answer is it all depends on what you're trying to do,
Mhm.
right? And so there's like a bunch of different answers, so. Yeah, if just say we didn't have to cross Chase Brook, right, it was like really easy access.
Yeah.
Then I'd say, I guess this is not skirting your question, but I'll just make sure we circle back.
Uh-huh.
Then it'd be really easy to go in and like say, put some groups in to create some early successional habitat and try to increase diversity, because I'm pretty sure I listed the entire forest as even aged.
Okay.
It's all probably within like, 40 years, like I bet, and sometimes you're kind of shooting in the dark, but I bet the hemlocks along the brook are probably between like 80 to maybe 150 years old. And then, like the rest of it's probably like 80 to 120 with some scattered older trees. Because the last work that was done 40 years ago, they did put in some groups, so then maybe you have 2 ages, but technically you need 3 age classes for it to be uneven aged. And that's pretty typical of New England or Vermont in general, right? Most forests are even aged, they're 80 to 120, 150 years old. And they've been cut a couple times in that time frame, but not necessarily to create new age classes or not intentionally. So how important is it? You know, we need forests, but forests don't need us, right? And so, like, if we all went away tomorrow, Chase Brook's gonna be fine, it's gonna work itself out. But then there's all these other pressures, right, like climate change, invasive species, and we're trying to like make better habitat than there is now, because everything's pretty homogeneous. So then it gets a little more, I guess, not pressing, but something to think about. But what management does is you can essentially get to old growth characteristics faster, right? And like real purists are gonna argue that you can't do that at all, but like if like from a big tree factor, right? To have like big downwoody debris and large diameter trees, with management, with that in mind, you can get to some of those criteria, like with a 150-year-old forest, or maybe 200 years, and then it's like on its own, it's like 400 years. So you're just kind of like trying to speed things up.
Because you're opening it up so that certain trees can get bigger.
Right, and you're doing things like maybe cutting and leaving some, so like, dropping trees on the ground, so there's big downwoody debris.
Right.
Cause a lot of forests, like there's not a lot of downwoody debris, cause we take it all out and extract it and sell it, and that's what's been done since
Mhm.
we all got here.
Okay.
So, and then maybe even like creating snags, so, yeah, just trying to create more complexity, basically. So hopefully that answered your question, that there's not necessarily a correct answer, it really comes down to what your intentions are, and you're right, just like you guys are pulling knotweed, and that's great, but then to other people, they might think that's crazy and not worth their time at all, you know, so just to try to,
Yeah, to piggyback on that, considering that there's not a lot of hardwood regeneration in there,
Mhm.
everything seems to be, beech sucker,
right,
white maple. And there's a lot of deer in there, as you
Yeah.
know, heavy browsing, closed canopy. What do you think the best way to generate different species, more cherry, white and yellow birch and
yeah,
sugar maple and red maple? Those patch cuts would have to be a certain size, those down trees would protect.
a little bit, yeah. Yeah, so yeah, the patch cut groups or patches would need to be like probably 3/4 to an acre
Mhm.
in size minimum. And then, yeah, you try to leave some tops to protect it, their generation, then also. Like, you can hunt in Chase Brook, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, but like maybe trying to encourage people to hunt there, like maybe closing the trails. Or, putting up signs for people to kind of maybe stay out of there some with their dogs or whatever during hunting season.
Mhm.
Yeah, cause there is heavy browse there, cause yeah, you pretty much see beech and then some softwood and most other stuff, and it is a closed canopy, so. Got all those things, but yeah, then typically, even if you opened up the canopy some, you're just gonna get heavy browse.
Yeah. So it'd be important to keep it protected a little bit. Did you notice when you're up in that highest point in the southeast corner, that they cut Jason, on Joey's property up at the Marble Hill Farm?
Yeah,
They cut in there, and I was wondering if it makes sense, since there's already, but everything coming up there is beech and straight maple, there's not anything else coming up out of there. But if we were gonna cut, if we would focus in that area to kind of make an already existing cut essentially bigger,
oh yeah, that's not a
that
bad
kind of
idea, yeah,
piggyback on that.
yep. Yeah, I mean, you've gotta leave the boundary trees, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, I mean, you're creating a little more habitat there.
One other question I have is, you haven't done this yet in Moortown, but you are planning on taking out, what was it, spruce? or-
Yeah, we're gonna do a commercial harvest there, and it was scheduled for this year, but we haven't, by we, I mean, I, haven't really started any planning, so
Okay,
might be kicked till next year.
and
Um,
I wonder about, kind of the community public pushback on, altering this forest that they know and love as it is.
I think education,
And that would have to happen.
Mm.
I'm sure you've been doing that in Wartown. I think we talked about. that.
Right, so, I mean, yeah, we got like almost no public comment on the plan.
Hmm.
Like, I think 2 residents, basically. And, one guy asked, what the select board was gonna do with the money. Like kind of as a joke, right, cause the money's gonna go to the rec, committee. But, and then the other one was in a butter who was concerned, cause we're talking about building a landing and then making that a parking lot, cause there's not a parking lot on town land. And they were very concerned, that, then the trails would get really busy and everyone from Fayston would be coming to Moortown to hike at the Moortown Town Forest, and we have this new parking lot. And so that's an ongoing discussion, but, and so that was really the only public comment we got, and we presented at that town meeting. And, no one really had any objections, but the plan is to have, cause most of the Moortown Forest has a VLT easement on it. And so the plan is to do, in conjunction with VLT and Audubon, do like probably during the harvest walks and post-harvest walks. To try to like paint the picture a little bit, like we're not just out here, I mean, the town will make some money, but like that's not our objective, it's just an ancillary benefit essentially.
is it plantation Norway spruce?
Yeah, we're gonna clear some plantation Norway spruce, there's some red pine to cut, that's also plantation, and then we're gonna do some groups and some other stuff.
Awesome.
Can you get anywhere with the sack of acorns?
Oh, putting in the ground?
Hmm.
Yeah, you can, yeah, and then it's in the plan, but it's not, it's just described that, okay, then we have this 2-acre group, maybe we can have a community thing where we do some. Like, climate forward planting, right, of hickories or even get some American chestnuts that are, so. But that's all, but that takes some, but that wouldn't take a lot of organization, but that would just be like something cool to, we could have. Like kids from the school do it, so then, if they feel that.
All the Cornellians in the valley could get behind that.
What's that?
You get everybody from Cornell in the valley.
Right.
On the Chestnut Project.
Right, yeah, and and maybe the kids come back there in 10 years and say, oh,
Yeah,
great,
cool.
here are the trees. So, so that's the tentative plan there, but we haven't really moved anything forward.
Just having pickleball courts enhance public interest in the town forest alongside.
No, we didn't really touch that area, it's like kind of excluded, the little rec area, so basically just said there's the rec area, we're not really covering it in the plan, but.
Don't mess with the pickleball courts.
I hate pickleball. I was a tennis player.
So, and I am still, I gave it a quick read, and if you want to take more time to fill in, please do. You look at the blocks and you provide management objectives.
Mhm.
And my understanding, and I may have, it was a couple of days ago when I took a quick look, was that the way I understood it was that the management objectives were basically for forest health overall, or ecological purposes, that it wasn't to for economic gain. That,
Right.
Does a plan like this for a town forest, how specific does one need to get to identify the potential that Guy was talking about, for stand management in particular locations? Or do we typically in a town forest management plan, and I don't know if they're different than a forest management plan for private property also, so
It kind of depends on the town and what they want, but not necessarily.
okay,
There's just usually a little bit more, like a bit more detail and the objectives and and you have the public use kind of all put
Yeah.
in there, so. But like the core of it, where you're saying, okay, here are our stands, this is how we want to manage them, this is what I want to manage them for. That's all kind of basically the same.
okay. So for the stand management, if say my goal, let's just, as an assumption, my goal as a Conservation Commission member, this is just my personal vote, would be, I want to manage Chase Brook for ecological diversity and health that allows for recreational use and educational opportunities. So from a forest management perspective, there may be trails for recreation and education, but there's might be management opportunities for the forest, whatever that may look like, because I don't know enough beyond the Duxbury tour of kind of what can be done in a forest. How specific should a plan in your mind be? If that was my goal, and maybe other Conservation Commission members, we were like, we agreed on that. And we go through public, we have a draft and we go through in the public, it provides its comments, and then we provide our recommendations to the select board and pitch like our view of how to manage this forest, and the select board's gonna decide. How specific in your mind does the plan need to be to, I guess, to be a living document that instructs, maybe all these commission members, including myself, are gone in X number of years, that instructs the commission for management of the forest to achieve those things within the 10 years, and maybe it's I know these things don't necessarily always get renewed or updated every 10 years, but if we were serious about trying to do some of these things in 10 years and we had to figure it out, like how prescriptive should the plan be versus versus like, these are the general things, and then we figure it out 5 years from now, we decide we're gonna move forward with a particular project. Do you?
Yeah, I get what you're saying, yeah, so, if there are specific things that, you or the rest of the commission want to do, then that should be in there pretty specifically. So say hypothetically, like, we were gonna do management, right, the prescriptions for Moortown are very specific.
Okay,
Right, and they say because we also have a easement with the state of Vermont for deer yard management guidelines there, so there's like some core deer yards, so. We have to follow the deer management guidelines. And so like the prescriptions, the whole idea is like, if I left tomorrow and the town wanted to implement the plan as is, they could theoretically give my plan. Or, you know, the plan I developed to another forester, and that forester could develop it.
Okay,
And so, like, if there are specific things that you guys want to do, then it should be in there pretty explicitly, and then. You know, the way these things work is like, if you don't do the work or you don't do something, then like VLT is obviously not gonna like, you know. Get mad or slap your, you know, so it's like, to describe something and or say, okay, we're gonna try and do this in 2030. And then if it doesn't happen, there's kind of no repercussions, right?
right.
So,
Well, these are, at least ecologically in my mind, these are good intentions that would be identified in the management plan. We may fall short, resources.
right, oh yeah, and that's what I
money,
mean, yeah, like
like-
not from, yeah.
The land trust won't hold us to it, but if something doesn't exist in there and we wanted to do something. Then we'd have an issue, right? If we don't have a prescription.
I mean, I guess it depends, yeah, like say if there's nothing, like say there's no management in here, which kind of currently isn't, and then say. Like, okay, yeah, we wanna put in the bridge, we wanna do it, and then yeah, then the plan would need to be amended.
Yeah,
And then because it's a town, then like, I
It's a
guess technically
process.
it needs to go back out for
but
public
we wanted to
comment.
get that stuff in there,
Right,
things that we'd like to do.
exactly, yeah, I mean, if it's small stuff like trail maintenance or. Boundary line maintenance, right, like that's, no one's gonna, but yeah, if it's big stuff, then especially because it's a town, right, then you technically probably need to like. Get some public comment and get the select board to reapprove it, so.
If we. If we had a project, this prescriptive project, and this, I think all my questions are probably difficult, because I really don't know anything.
No, it's-
But if it was. If I had to go to the select board because it was in there and defend it, you know. I have no idea what cost I'm talking about, and it's something for the ecological health of the forest. And my sales pitch is gonna be focused on, this is a town forest, and this is a great opportunity to provide, you know, in this nestle block. You know, somewhat adjacent to Campbell's Hump State Forest lands, and, you know, you've got all these different. Areas nearby that build up opportunity for diversity. So this is an opportunity for the town of Fayston to do something positive in getting towards a more healthy forests. Maybe these things take time, but we're putting it we're changing the trajectory. And so the commission has thought this was an important thing to push. How much money are we potentially talking about if it's ecological? To bring someone in to do a,
So like 2 1 acre patch cuts. just
Okay,
For
yeah.
example,
I could ask Max, will he charge them, just cause I was working for a client of his shortly after that,
this
but
is Moortown, or no, this was.
that was the thing in
the-
Duxbury.
Okay, yeah, yeah,
But what did, oh, I can't remember, I worked for a land trust in Jericho and they did like 25 acres of TSI, like timber stand improvement. And I wanna say. For that, I mean, they were under $1,000 an acre, I think was its cost, I'd have to look
Okay.
back in my records, but I just.
But a bigger project.
Yeah, it's a bigger
Yeah.
project, right, so like say 2 1 acre patch cuts would maybe be like a couple $1,000, you know?
So it's not crazy.
Not crazy, and then there are, like there is, and it would like maybe be longer, but, there is a chainsaw safety program called
Hmm.
like New England, it's in here.
you can use that as opportunity.
Yeah, sometimes like you can just like be like, okay, here's my property,
Hmm.
you know, these are what we want cut. And so cause I actually know another forester that lives in Berlin, and so he like offers up his property for it, and he goes and marks what he wants the students to cut, and it depends on the class. Right, and then he skids the wood out, so like they just cut it, it's firewood, so they cut the firewood while he's at work or whatever, and then
Mhm.
like he goes and gets it in the winter,
Yeah,
you know, and
So
so
that's
that's.
creative workarounds.
Right, and you know, and
Workarounds,
right.
awesome.
yeah, so you probably like, they wouldn't get a whole acre patch cut done, right, or like you wouldn't, but they might get part of it. Right, or maybe they could do whatever, you know, so there's like a few things like that you can kind of.
Well, and again, it's not like the plan is locking us into, you know,
Yeah, we don't have. to-
committed.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
just, these are recommendations,
There,
and then
you-
as,
We don't have to go through it again.
Right, cause in like, yeah, sorry,
Just to clarify, but if we didn't have a prescriptive patch cut, then we do have a problem if we wanna do that in 7 years.
Yeah, if we didn't
Yeah.
have it in the plan,
right,
So
yeah,
better to have it in if it's something
Yes.
we want,
Right.
and if we don't get to it, so be.
yes.
and then I tie, like, sometimes in, like, my plans, I tie stuff. To economics a lot, right, like, oh, if market conditions exist. We'll do this. Or if we're working in the stand adjacent to it, we'll do this work, right? And it's because it's like by itself, it's not economically feasible. And so we could kind of do the same thing, like say you want to prescribe patch cuts. Figure out where we want to do that and say like, okay, here, we would like to do these patch cuts. If the economics of the town budget or some other funding source allows.
Right, because that allows us to go get a grant
Right.
or do whatever we need to.
Right, so just like, it gives you the most, that type of language, it gives you the most amount of options.
Right,
So it allows you to do it, but if you don't have the funding or, you know, the town doesn't have the money, then you know, you don't have the money, you're gonna get the funding, you don't have to do it.
So where would we put that in this plan?
Well, that's kind of up to you guys too, I mean, it could probably be done. In every stand except for the. Stand one, right, the Hemlock stand along Chase Brook, and a lot of that, and I should have printed out like 5 maps, sorry.
but
we
it,
can pull this up, these guys have the plan.
But, you know, most of that stand is in surface water buffer zone, Chase Brook, so essentially can't be managed anyways,
here.
but.
And there's a bunch of wet area, like you point out where those, 2 varsity wetlands are, like in the top of, like stand 3. Like,
Yeah,
in 3,
yeah,
4, it's
four,
all
yeah,
swampy over in there.
right, yeah. But like, so one, you know, you guys can, like,
I can look over Andrew's shoulder.
okay, well, I can pass it that way, I mean, the shape of that is like. Basically follows the terrain, cause it drop, you know, also you guys know, it drops off really sharply. And so I essentially just followed that terrain line, so like I guess the surface water buffer zone runs out of it. For just a tiny bit, I think, but.
Yeah.
So essentially like that whole thing, even though it's not in the surface water buffer zone, really shouldn't be managed, cause it's a steep slope leading down to the brook, right? So we're not gonna do anything in there.
Yeah, we'll
Um,
probably have to get an Act 250 permit.
you wouldn't, logging in general is exempt, but yeah, it's like, yeah,
Facetious, sorry.
yeah, no, it's okay.
So mostly 2 and 3.
Yeah, probably 2 and 3 would be the most reasonable, I mean,
This is where that's cutting is right here.
okay,
That's Joey's.
That's showing.
Right at the corner.
yeah,
Corner.
yeah,
There's more in there, but adjacent to the property, it's like right there.
yeah, I went to that corner, I know I found that corner and then found that pin down there. Yeah, I mean, 4 could also, especially if we're just doing non-commercial patch cuts, right, cause then there's like non-equipment, because it's wet where the wetland is and kind of through there, but then it gets dry up in there, there's kind of a big,
Up on the hill.
yeah, it's kind of like a big flattish area.
Yeah.
Right, so patch cut could be in there too, but yeah, probably the most feasible for access would be 2 and 3.
Mhm. And then, so how would we, like, moving forward? Like, if we were gonna get something in the plan, would you make the best decision of where these would go, or in cooperation with us, figure out? Because the other thing would be where the trails are, and
Right,
we'd have to try to keep it away from those.
well, yes, the Catamount Trail, I think, is 100 foot
Right away.
in like influence area, so you have to be outside of that, and we have to buffer the vernal pool.
Mhm.
Like minimum is 50 foot no cut now, but then biologists will tell you,
100,
well, they really want more than that, I think like ideally it's like 500 feet.
yeah,
And so, I mean, that
the
would,
influence zone, right?
right, like, so they like. Yeah, I know, I think in reality, like, for a vernal pool, like, so the state law is like, there's a 50 foot no cut around it. But it could be like cleared right outside of that. But like a wildlife biologist will tell you that they would really like to see like a couple 100 feet, like
Yeah.
no cut,
Yeah,
Would
I've
you-
even seen 750 feet in
right?
some plans.
Yeah.
So if you were looking at doing some sort of work in 4, where we have the vernal pool wetlands, right?
Oh, yeah, the wetlands, yeah, right at the bottom of 4.
And we were doing this from an ecological perspective, then we would want to take the greatest riparian buffer
Correct,
as possible.
yeah,
So that would be in the plan, like we wouldn't want to get 500 feet or whatever.
well, yeah, so the 500 feet isn't from, like, I've heard biologists say that for a vernal pool.
Uh-huh.
And so, like, maybe we ask Vermont Fish and Wildlife and see what. Like their like strongest recommendation is for a buffer around a wetland, you know?
Is there any? Would there be any reason to try to, if we could pick anywhere within that area for a patch cut for ecological health for the forest? Is there any reason why there's benefit to being slightly closer to water? Not say more than 300 feet or
Right.
400 feet, but like, I mean. One could say, oh, just stay 500 feet, we just stay very far away.
Right,
Period. But if are there ecological reasons why you would actually be looking at the potential of being close
yeah,
to 500 feet to a vernal pool, or would you just always want to stay away?
I think you'd always wanna stay away unless maybe you were managing for like some specific species that wanted. Something like that, you know? But
Okay.
otherwise, I'd say you probably just stay as far away as possible,
Yep.
cause the whole thing with vernal pools is like, they don't want light coming in, cause like.
Dries out.
Yeah, when you thin it, it dries out the forest floor, and so then it dries out all the herbs that are there, and so it makes it harder for them to
Yeah.
move, and so. So yeah, I mean, 2 and 3 are probably the most feasible, cause then they're the furthest away from all the water, right? Cause even if like, I mean, this is to scale, so, I mean. Like, 500 feet around that vernal pool, like pretty much is, I guess that's a Catamount trail there. But it pretty much
Yes.
makes like an arc like that. Like, so if we wanted the maximum buffer around the vernal pool, pretty much like arcs on that
That
trail,
whole corner.
it's that whole corner basically. Right, and so then you're left with like half or a third of 2, so maybe like 10 acres and then. Most of 3, depending on what you wanted to buffer.
Yeah.
Cause part of the reason I didn't prescribe any management besides. The brook is, right, I looked at the survey results and. Like, I didn't look at them, like paw through them super hard, I figured we'd dig into that deeper, but like. I think forest management was pretty low on the list,
Mhm.
right, for most
Definitely.
respondents.
Yeah.
And then because of, Chase Brook, the surface water buffer zone. This Catamount Trail influence area. Then you're not left with a whole lot of area to manage, right? And if it was like. Easy access, well, then it's still fine, you just work in all those squiggly lines, but then. If you have tough access in that. Then you're kind of like, well, it might just make sense not to do anything for a lot of reasons, right? Especially because it is heavily. Not that like you shouldn't do management because it's heavily used recreationally,
Mm.
but you have all these things besides the access that. Kind of make it tough.
Mhm.
There's a lot to balance, isn't
Yeah,
there?
right.
Because of the trails in there. There's not a lot of space.
Right.
In there to work with when you really start to break it down.
But like, I don't think it's also, I mean, because I was just in. I don't think like if you could like say not the Catamount Trail, but one of the trails, like. It's not a bad thing to work next to a trail, right? Like intentionally and. Like maybe have an interpretive sign hypothetically, right? So then people like, oh, okay,
You get to see what's
Mhm.
happening and.
Right, I mean, I've been at Kingdom Trails and I had this guy, it was like. Cause one of the trails went through like. A recent logging job and the guy called it like deforestation. And I was like, well, I don't think it's deforestation, we're in a forest. Right, and so like that guy has no idea. He just looks at it, he's like, so it's not a bad thing to like. Have like, oh, okay, we did this intentional work and here's what we did. So, but yeah,
Well, I mean, it's just interesting, like we saw in the survey, a lot of people are, very opposed to seeing trees coming down. And that's not what they want, but. Then again, if you don't know the justification behind why you're going in and taking trees out in order to attract species that might not otherwise be there. and,
right,
Increase ecological diversity, they don't know that necessarily.
it's a good opportunity to educate a lot of people.
For
Right,
sure.
because of the high
Yeah.
volume of,
Use,
yeah,
yeah.
Well, and the location, I mean, Pratt Refuge is gonna have more signs, right, at some
Mhm.
point to explain what's happening.
Mhm.
I think it's probably gonna be a much smaller number of folks that will just happen across for a walk to learn
Mhm.
compared to Chasebrook, where it could be a lot of folks that are there for other reasons that you're catching them with the opportunity. Recognizing that I mean, I also don't wanna, muck up. I think recreation's important and, if it doesn't make sense because of all the different, these little puzzle pieces that I'm looking at between the trails and. Yeah, I understand that too, but I definitely think it could be viewed as as really just an educational project more than anything that gets
If you can-
diversity
But if you
benefit.
can establish in patch cuts like this. Red oaks, for instance, or something like that. Are you also possibly creating a plantation for the betterment of neighboring forest?
you mean be like, if you
You know, like-
establish a bunch of red oaks.
Yeah, so all of a sudden they're producing acorns and those acorns are getting delivered onto
Right.
the neighbor's yard.
Oh, certainly,
You
yeah,
know? And can we claim that that's a cause just for, just like in French, a noble cause that, we can pitch to the public as part of the seeking acceptance for the expense of doing some patch cutting.
right,
Mhm. You know what I was just thinking too, I think these are all good thoughts. And in terms of getting the public, you said, the public didn't get too engaged in the management plan. But with Tim's skills, um, maybe as we're considering these possibilities, and this is maybe a new or a concept people aren't familiar with. An article for the Valley Reporter or,
Definitely.
I'm specifically thinking, yes, of the Valley Reporter,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what people read. Maybe a little bit on Front Porch Forum, but probably more like an article.
And I don't know, just examples of places where this has happened, maybe with a little bit of time so that people see how the forest is regenerating and how it's been,
right.
where do those examples exist?
Like,
That could,
well, like with interpretive signs, that's a tough one, but, like there's been a bunch of work done in the Heinsberg Town Forest, like in and around.
With a lot of signage too.
Right, um,
yes,
in and around the recreational trails. Like Heinsberg, I mean, that's a bigger parcel, it's like 800 acres, and the Heinsberg is like, I think, kind of committed to managing it. Right, and they're also like gleaning some revenue from like this, all these other benefits, like it's not their main goal, it's just an ancillary benefit. So that probably makes it a pretty easy sell to the
Right.
town as well.
right.
But like, I don't think they've really had any issues there. They did some work, I think the biggest thing is like communicating it and like
Mhm.
education, like trying to get people out there because. There was work done in Berrytown Forest a few years ago, and I don't know, I think some of it just gets like really inflammatory, like. But I think it really came down to like. Just like there wasn't a lot of explanation about it beforehand.
Mm,
Yeah, they just saw it and. didn't
Right.
know anything about it.
Right, cause like the work was fun, I mean, it's
Mhm.
fun, I've been in there, it's like nothing crazy, but I just think.
Shock value.
Yeah, shock value, or maybe it was cause even like the county forester came and looked at it and was like, well, there's nothing wrong here.
right,
And so, I mean, I think education, just outreach in general, cause I mean, you're not, like, there's always gonna be someone that's against whatever you're doing. Right, and so you can't make everybody happy, but if you can at least say, oh, well. Right, we're doing it really intentionally and we're not just trying to slick off Chase Brook to make some money,
Mm,
I think that's probably the biggest.
And I think too, like some of the feedback on the knotweed has been, okay, that's wonderful, but what are you doing to like, reestablish native species in that area? So if part of our story is some native plantings or whatever, I think that would be helpful. And then maybe too, like, as part of this, if we decided we wanted to submit something, a field trip over to
Mhm.
like the Heinsberg town forest where, you know, we go, we invite the public, they can come on with us, and then that's maybe part of the article. Kim, I'm sorry, I'm like really thinking you would be ideal for this.
No, I'd be happy to do that. I was just wondering, I mean, I think using the Valley Reporter, I think Front Porch Forum, I think all of those are great. When people have done signs on the property that you've seen, how have they done those? Because I've seen them in Massachusetts where people will have like laminated 8x10, sheets that explain what the process is very briefly. So people could understand what's going on. So as they're walking by and they're seeing, oh, damn, all these trees have been cut. Why is this being done? Okay, we're doing a patch cut here, trying to encourage more growth of this type of trees to diversify the forest. How have you done signs when you've had things like this or when you've seen them?
Yeah, so I haven't done any signs, personally, but, typically they're like metal or something kind
Okay.
of durable, like maybe like laser printed or something.
Okay.
Or maybe it's like a kiosk where you put the thing behind the plastic, right? They're like semi-permanent, more than just a laminated sheet of paper.
Okay.
And Heinsberg has some of these.
I think, yeah, I didn't see those. I was in there recently and I
I
didn't,
forget what they.
yeah, I don't think I've seen those. I hadn't been there for a long time. I was there twice recently and
Audubon.
yeah, I mean, Audubon has a bunch of signage because I actually talked to Audubon about the Moortown thing. And so I think they kind of have like some plug and play signs that then maybe just edit a little
Mhm.
bit. So, but yeah, I think something durable, because if it's like a laminated sign, like someone could just pull it off, right? And then,
That goes the thumbtack.
and there goes the public outreach, right? So I think it's like something that is kind of permanent-ish.
They did have QR codes on them for additional information as well.
Yeah, someone brought that
Which is
up
great.
recently, maybe at that meeting we were at, Brian, someone like
Hmm.
had a thing like, yeah, to have a QR code on it, because then it's just like, it
Yeah.
takes you to the plan and,
Mhm.
all this
Yeah.
other stuff.
Yeah,
What do you need from us to um, take what you've done and really start to zero in on prescriptions and recommendations that are specific, like we've just been talking about? I mean, we obviously all really need to familiarize ourselves with plan and then determine those priorities, look at the survey and now come back to what you've produced and start to really tweak this, because I know that things like, we haven't even talked about trails, we were
Yes.
talking about, is there a lot of pressure in there because of the trails that exist? Are the Mad River Riders considering more trail? I don't think so, but the Catamount Trail, that is what it is.
Right,
The Mad River Path, that I don't think there's any plan anytime soon for that to be at all a priority for
right,
that land, but educational considerations, making sure, there's been history since the original plan was written. A lot has happened, over those years, that if that plan has been, the plan that we've been operating off of, and so it's getting all of these other components, giving them their due, and again, getting very specific about what those things are and what we, as we look ahead, what we see those things.
yeah.
right. Yeah, I think, like, cause I'm coming to the July meeting too, right? Is that what we said? Via email or no? Can't remember. It's 23rd. Well, it doesn't matter for now, but I think
Yeah,
it's
we'll
like,
figure it out.
I think like, once you have time to like, kind of really paw through it. Start like spitballing edits or like other sections, or cause. Cause it's like, it depends on how like in-depth on the trail usage you wanna get
Right,
in there, cause like, and I just put kind of like, okay. These organizations have trails. For more information, they should be contacted.
mhm,
Right, cause I just put that as a starting point essentially. I don't, and this is up to you guys, I don't think it makes sense to say, oh, Mad River Riders have X amount of miles of trails in there. right? But it might be good to put guidelines as to like maintenance and expansion.
Mhm.
You know, like, okay, well, we're gonna do maintenance in conjunction with CTA and MRR,
Mhm.
right? And any expansion. Well, CTA is not gonna expand, but like
Yeah.
any expansion by Mad River Path or MRR is gonna have to be like a joint thing, where, you
Mhm.
know, cause that's
Mhm.
probably how it would have to be anyways, but it's like kind of good just to have that on paper.
Or we
Mhm.
might want to include calling out guidance to observe, take some instruction from the VORAC program that we ran through in this area and use that as guidance. And we could state that explicitly, that this is some of the guiding principles that he would want people to abide by when they consider approaching us for changes to trail situations in there or additional recreational uses. We observe that, those principles, I guess.
Well, we've talked about, I mean, I know, we've talked about these bike trails, they do get a fair amount of use. Sure would be nice to know how many people are using Chase Brook. I don't know how easy it would be to get some sort of a counter
It's pretty easy.
to know what the numbers are. But the degradation of the trails are not built to, you know, best standards. They are eroding, the water bars are non-existent, so there is a lot of work that probably ought to be done in there by the Mad River Riders, and we don't have any sort of formal, and we've talked about that too, there's nothing to formalize that relationship with the riders, it's always just sort of a,
Right, but then
they're
like,
in there and.
yeah, you guys could make an MOU, like separate from the plan, like an MOU
Right.
with them.
And that
Could we
would just
put-
be something.
Right,
Yeah.
Could we put a request for an MOU in the plan? Would that be helpful? That we would like to do a memorandum of understanding with the different trails on this regarding trail maintenance, trail upkeep, use of trails? Would that be helpful?
Yeah, I think so. I'm talking to the groups, you know, talk to the
Yeah.
Catamount
Yeah,
Trails Association, talk to the Mad River Riders and talk to the Mad River Path people and see if they have any plans moving forward, you know, for maintenance, for improvements, for, you know, anything. There's really not a whole lot in terms of adding more trails that I could see in there. And I
I
haven't
don't
heard
think
of
so.
anybody having any interest, but certainly improving the trails,
mhm,
it needs some improvement.
yeah,
yeah, cause I didn't put it in there, but I mean, yeah, like when we were there and I saw like, yeah, there's definitely erosion on the trail, so that's something like like, do you guys want that kind of detail? Right, it's like, you want that detail in there, like, okay, the trails, regardless of whether it's an MOU or not, need to have like some baseline maintenance from an erosion standpoint.
Probably,
Right.
I mean, definitely from an inventory perspective for the trails.
and that's our job. I mean,
Well,
isn't
it's
that
part of
what
the,
we're
it's part,
tasked to
it's
do?
part of the town forest, so if
Yeah.
folks are like, well, why aren't there more trails? It's like, well, first, as you see in the management plan, this is the state of existing trails. And from the management plan, this is like future thinking if the management plan got there and was approved and said something to the effect that like the management goals recreationally are to rehab trails to.
Or relocate, I think the riders were even talking about,
Right, so rehab,
Relocation.
relocate for, you know, ecological slash forest health,
Mhm.
you know, water quality, like all the different things that come into trail building. And like, the goal is to make the existing trails better for those purposes, I'm sure there's a bunch of trail standards that speak to that language that we could. Well, we definitely can pull some of the CRB language and put it in.
mhm, mhm.
As far as principles. But I think it'd be helpful to say that this is at least for the next 10 years, this is what we envision with the recreational trails. And then draft goes out, see what the public says, and you know, public says, we need way more trails, then you evaluate the draft plan, see whether there's consideration in the management plan for new trails and what kind of process that would go through for siting and locating to make sure water quality and forests and wildlife are not adversely impacted in a substantial way. I think it'd be helpful to have that in there. Sounds like, I mean, I can definitely, when we have the Google Doc, I can start pulling some stuff from CRB as far as just general trail, where the valley's going on trails.
Do you think that's the best way for us to just start, just getting into the plan and getting in there and adding paragraphs where
Yeah, I think
they
so.
belong?
Yeah, like,
and-
and I haven't worked in a Google Doc since we did the Moretown thing, but yeah, you can add it like off to the side or
Right.
whatever, you know, so,
Comments.
right, so then I
Yeah.
could, yeah, like.
You'll
I
see
could-
what's happening.
Right, exactly, and then,
Do you see yourself as the author as we continue to,
I don't
It
I don't
takes-
have to be, it's kind of like if someone wants to take a section,
yeah,
Right.
okay.
cause like I look at this, especially cause like with towns, it all depends on what level of detail they want. You
Yeah.
know, and so I look at this as just a starting point, like, and I think you brought it up, but I missed it, like I didn't put in what you call it, like other uses, or not other uses, but I think in the Moortown plan, just like a. And that was someone else's idea on the
Mm.
committee, like just a bullet list of allowed uses and disallowed uses.
Right,
You know, like kind of near the front, so just like plain and simple.
yeah,
And that exists in the original plan, stuff like that.
yeah, that language,
Well,
we could just,
Oh, it does in Tom's older plan?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. So, yeah, like that'd be a good section to add in here.
Right.
Right, and
Yeah.
so it sounds like unless anything's changed, most of that could almost just be like taken
Yeah.
from the old plan, just transcribed
Included, yeah.
essentially.
but I
Yeah.
think even just your point, this is so helpful to have this conversation, your thoughts about encouraging hunting in there.
Right,
That could be good for the forest and, closing the trails, they do that, right, in Vermont, they tell you to stop
Well,
Yeah.
some of the trails, some of us aren't
Yeah,
best about
yeah,
observing that,
I mean,
but.
I think like, yeah, I
not
mean,
everybody sees it.
yeah, it's public land, so you can't really
Right.
tread, but like, I think,
Like the state land though, they close all the trails in the state land, like up in,
They-
yeah, during deer season.
like in Waterbury, you mean,
No, I think
There's
they
probably
do
a
here.
Conti forest that they definitely do, right?
What's that?
The Silvio Conti forest up in the.
Well, I know that
Okay.
the Mad Riders post trails
Yeah.
closed,
Yeah.
during deer season.
right, I mean, I think that's what most people is like posted, like, I think, Fellowship of the Wheel does that. Like, definitely for Heinsberg and maybe some other stuff, just post it closed, right,
Yeah.
but then there's like.
Yeah.
No fiscal closure,
Right,
you know,
I guess you could put
It's-
signs up at the trailheads,
right,
red sign.
Yeah,
when
but
these
then you gotta
guys-
encourage hunting that,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
give people the opportunity to do it.
So,
Yeah.
all right, so,
Otherwise, you're not having any effect just because you close the
Oh,
trails. People gotta actually
totally, and
kill
that,
the
people
deer.
love to walk their dogs at
Mhm.
Facebook.
so schedule, so, we certainly, we can have you come back in July, that means we would all need to do our work,
Mhm.
like reviewing. Providing content, edits, comments, thoughts, questions. With enough time for you to look at that before July, I'm just trying to get a sense of when, like, what,
That seems ambitious
too
to
much,
me,
okay,
I think it would be more realistic for us to aim for the August meeting, to have had the time to
to do that.
make edits and revisions and suggestions, and then have you come, but are you around in August? I don't
I'd be
remember.
around for the August meeting, yeah, I mean, like, the Google Doc can be kind of like a living thing.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, it's
right?
not like,
It can be
exactly,
email- And
and it
like,
will be,
yeah, and like, you can email me whenever, right, or edit whenever, and I might
Yeah.
not, like. Go back in and dig into it,
Right.
like, just once a week or something, but like. A
Yeah.
lot can happen in there and then everyone can see what's going on.
Yeah.
So, if,
Does
that
it-
kind of doesn't take the place of a meeting, but like, as far as collaboration, it's almost better, cause it's like everyone can just do it when they have their time and then. Right, you
And make our suggested edits, and then everyone can see what people are suggesting.
right,
Yeah.
I agree about, pushing it maybe to
Yeah.
August, because I
August
think it
sounds
really would be helpful. If you,
To do a site
to
visit.
go over to Heinsberg,
Yeah.
or if there's
I'd
another
be interested in checking it
example.
out.
oh, for sure, and that's something that we can do.
Yeah.
But I was wondering if it would make sense for us to put a date on the calendar to go to Chasebrook and look at some of these places where, we kind of went into the weeds about where we might do a cut in there. and would it be worth walking in there with you to get a better sense of where that might happen, if it's gonna happen in one or two places?
Yeah, maybe we just establish setbacks, go through the whole parcel.
Right.
And see where
Might be
that's
left
even feasible.
Yeah, cause I could even
Have a target of what to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah, cause I can even put that on a map, like I can put the 100-foot buffer around the CTA.
Okay.
I wasn't gonna have that on the map, cause it's like,
Right,
it's like gets too busy, but yeah, like. For this, we could put the 100-foot buffer around the CTA and the 500 buffer around the vernal pool. And I could ping someone from Fish and Wildlife or someone from Audubon and say like, well, what would our what should our setback be from the forested wetland?
I
Right?
heard too, over here, 750 feet was on something you saw,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's. a
Well,
lot.
You get into that number, there's no trail
okay.
anyway,
Yeah,
yeah,
so.
going back to what we were talking about with the, trail maintenance, in the first plan, that all is included, like management recommendations for trails under this skiing, hiking and biking trail section. So that's where it wouldn't be a management prescription in the forest, but it would just be like, what needs to be done there. For instance, the first one is relocate the travelway, the south portion of the Catamount Trail, and these recommendations are what we use as action items in the first plan. Like the
Okay.
things that we could do as a conservation commission, all came out of these management recommendations, and every section had one. So we could just add those lists of, things that we.
Right,
come
so
up
it's like
with.
another thing that can be transcribed and
Yeah.
tweaked, essentially.
for sure,
Yeah.
and just again, I think with Mad River Riders, I mean, they've had some changes. One of these guys who is really involved is not here for the year, but, I can go back and ask them if they've got any imminent plan for doing trail work, and just they don't.
The
They're-
latest
they're friendly,
conversations,
sir.
yeah, latest conversations through CRV were no. But.
Okay.
That's,
Okay.
we obviously want to confirm.
But that is something that I think would be valuable to have in this plan because
Yeah.
of, like I said, the trails are they're in rough shape in there in some places, so.
I agree. I was wondering if the stand descriptions, which take up almost half of the plan, could those be done as an appendix? Or do they need to be in there with those descriptions? So I was looking at both plans, and that was super detailed stuff. That was pages 49 to 72. 20.
That's all the good stuff there.
I think
Yeah, I
that's the
mean,
good stuff.
Yeah, I think, the only thing. I mean, I can format some of it down. I think
Okay,
if we want to, make it a more concise document, it would make more sense to pull out the boilerplate information, like.
Okay.
Particular sections in the beginning, right, leave the appendix in the way back. Saying like, okay, here's places you can go to find out this information, but the stand descriptions are specific to Chase Brook. Right,
okay,
and
got it.
different stands, a lot of the stuff in the beginning isn't, it's just background information. So yeah, like we could pull a bunch of that out if people wanted. But yeah, kind of the only thing we could take out of the stand descriptions would be like the pictures on the first page. But
But I think
honestly,
those are helpful.
honestly, like I almost like rely on the pictures like as much as written notes now sometimes. Like when I get back and write them, so like sometimes I take pictures. I mean, I try to take them like, I'm not a photographer, but I try to make sure they like kind of capture what the stand is. And so for me personally, it's like almost as good as my written notes or my
Mhm.
I
scribbles.
think the pictures need to be in there.
Keeps average Joe in the read too, it's like.
Yeah.
Yes,
Wait for the next cartoon in the New Yorker.
All right, well, we are coming up on the hour. Want to
Yeah.
be mindful of folks' time.
can we ask you questions? Can we send you questions?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Can I
Yeah,
ask you a couple quick ones?
yeah,
So with your methods, you use a 20-factor prism, the original was done with a 10.
yeah.
Are those methods comparable? Like when you come up with basal area and acceptable?
Yeah, so that's all comparable, so, yeah, 10 factor was the standard forever. And then probably like in, like around 2010s, like a lot of people started switching to a 20 factor and taking more inventory points.
Mhm.
And you can really get in the weeds into the, you know, statistics of it, but
Yeah,
a lot of people think that if you take more points with the 20 factor, you get a better picture of the forest. Cause you're counting fewer trees, but in more places, so you kind of like capture more variability.
mhm.
And
And you didn't specify, but you said like, was it around 25 plots that you did? The original was 23, just from what you wrote. You didn't have a number, but you said like a plot like every 3 acres.
Yeah.
Would be around 25
right,
plots.
yeah, and so that's like, yeah, so 1 to 3 acres is like what I pretty typically take with a 20 factor.
Mhm.
When you get lower than that, it's almost like getting too fine. And so Tom, I don't know, might have just taken a lot of 10 factor plots.
Yeah,
But like technically, he probably could have taken not half as few, but he could have maybe taken like 17 or
Okay.
something with his 10 factor.
yeah. And then with that in mind, then, if they're comparable, and there's no data in here that's comparing or forest metrics from the 2006 compared to now, like, could you compare, you know, basal area, acceptable stock and like Q factor between the two? And I know you mentioned like a Q factor of 1.5 is a target. I think Tom had it 1.6. Like, does that change over time as that forest gets bigger?
Well, so yeah, the Q fact, I would actually want to know what page, I don't know, like Q factor. Q factor is this thing that like no one knows what it is.
Yeah,
Actually, like in the forestry world, it was a requirement of the current use program forever. And so you'd have to like put your Q factor in there. And so you can like calculate your Q factor, but when you're in the woods, like practically speaking, like no one could stand there and say, oh, this is a Q factor of 1.2
yeah, you
or
just,
1.7.
Remind me again, Q factor is,
it tells how many small to large
Right,
stems are
yeah,
in it.
okay.
so, but it's like, you can't like walk into a stand and be like, oh, it's a 1.5, or it's a 1.6, I'm gonna take it to a 1.5, or what, you know.
So that isn't important anymore.
Yeah, I don't like Q factor at all, and I've like actually been working around it in current use for a long time through another technicality,
Yeah,
because it just doesn't give you an accurate picture.
yeah.
So you're saying it's like scoring gymnastics?
Potentially, yeah, like, well, no, it's an actual number, right? So it's like, it's technically objective, but then when you're out there,
Yeah.
like, you're not,
interesting,
you know,
yeah.
Could we do a comparison of basal area
yeah,
between, so we know what the forest has done?
Yep.
Over the last 20 years?
Yep.
That would be, I think, helpful, and to try to make it like a continuing plan, right? It's a updated plan. And so there isn't anything in the plan either that references the old plan. And I think that would be important too, just to know that these plans are associated, this is an update of this plan.
Yep.
and it's not a standalone plan, and then we can add all the things that have happened, you know, on the property since, but I think that would definitely be important.
Yeah.
That's where it's gonna be really helpful to Kai, because you've been so hands-on with a lot of the things that have happened
Yeah.
in there. Well, I mean, most recently, it's probably the Fred,
Yeah, the Fred Gilbert Trail.
But
Did you
was
see
that
the
a-
signs? Fred Gilbert Trail. There's a little dog walk trail. There's Joey shut off his land to dogs.
Okay,
So in that upper corner, that south corner, we connected the two trails when they went into Joey's together so that people could go in there and do a loop without
Okay.
going on his land.
okay, there's a sign there?
Yeah, there's one on each end.
Okay, huh, no, I don't think, yeah, cause I don't like, usually I don't end up walking the trails,
Yeah,
cause it like never gets me where I wanna go.
yeah.
It feels like, or sometimes I walk.
You
I-
bushwhack and get where you need to go.
Yeah, so I didn't really walk many of the trails, cause like sometimes I walk trails at work and then it always feels like, oh, it's gonna take me there, and it turns the other way.
Yeah,
So now I just like almost just stay off of them, cause I
Yeah.
just feel like you know, like 2 steps forward, 1 step back type of thing. So no, I don't think I saw those signs, but I'll have to check that out.
yeah. And then just updating the map that has a lot of the old trails, like when we used to cross at the lower bridge.
Right, yeah, no, and so I actually like in an email to Amy and Pete, I was like, I know these trail locations are wrong.
Mhm.
Cause I just took these off the state database I have on my computer, and so then she connected me to Bob from MRR. I think like today or
yeah,
yesterday.
he just emailed.
Yeah, and
saying that.
and added the like their updated trail, so
Oh, awesome.
yeah, so that'll all be
Yeah.
fixed.
And
Cause I was like, I know this is wrong, but I'm not gonna edit it, it's like
Yeah.
until I have them, so.
And if we gave you like a GPX of that
Yep.
new trail. you
Yeah,
could
I could
plug
add that in
in
for sure.
Okay,
Yeah, yeah, cause that's what he gave me,
okay,
so.
awesome. Beautiful.
Yeah, I think. We have our work cut out for us, and so. On those rainy summer nights, we can,
Hope we have some.
kind of thinking we will. Anything else?
No, maybe just a little bit more, I guess. I don't know if you sent something to all of us with a kind of next steps coming out of this. With the
Yeah.
link, once we have the Google Doc with the link and instructions, making sure we all know to have it in the setting where it's suggestions, so that Michael can see what we're offering, like all that kind of stuff. We'll want to do that, and then have you come back in August.
Yeah,
And then, yeah, I guess we should also be thinking about like. Then coming out of that, like, is the goal to be really close to a draft? That can go to the public, you know, like what? How close to a final draft V1 for public? Do we want? And that we might not know, we might just have to revisit that, but.
did you guys like have an overall timeline of? Like I said,
Yeah,
I just,
that's the question.
I work well off of timelines, like that's why I like basically set myself a deadline for the draft. Cause
Right,
otherwise I just like
kick it down
keep
the road.
not doing,
yeah.
you know, especially cause it's office work.
Right.
So,
I think originally we thought that Pete and I had a very ambitious thought as to timeline, and I don't think it was at all realistic. And so I think if everybody here thinks that having wordsmithed and added to our suggestions via a Google Doc in time for the August meeting,
I think that's a
does
good
that
goal.
sound like a reasonable?
I think it's a,
Deadline?
I think it's not just reasonable, but it's hard,
Necessary.
but it's reasonable. But it's important because we gotta put this stuff before the select board, before they start thinking about next year's money. We don't wanna be sending them a plan, new management plan. Especially one in which we don't wanna make any pitches for anything that might cost something besides
We may miss that window. I
taking
think.
down the forest reserve, but it would be a good way to establish the sense of urgency. Let's just say that.
You don't think we can meet that deadline?
No, we have to get a draft to the public. Public has to have an opportunity to review. You guys were talking about an open house of some sort. I assume that's all happening in the fall,
We thought September for.
right? So to get
On the
something, I
boulevard.
mean, it's possible, but I wouldn't see a final document going to the select board until. Oh, Yeah.
When on Boys Hill, we gave them a preview
no.
of the final, what we thought would be the final document. At the same time that we invited the public for comment.
Which
on
they
it.
would get
So
this
that
for sure.
that we would be able to share those things, but I
Yeah.
think if we were, you know. Anticipating that we could have something that we were starting to feel like we could sell by the end of September,
Well, that seems real.
that would be,
I think so.
that would be a good
I
idea.
do too.
Yeah,
I did talk to Chuck Martell just to ask him about a little bit of process and how much do they want to know, and we've got a draft from you, and Chuck said he wasn't really sure, and he wasn't actually convinced that the select board needed to even approve something that was a plan update,
And,
not a new plan.
Oh.
So he
yeah.
recommended that I talk to Vermont
that's
Land
interesting.
Trust, but he sounded very
Huh, we should sort that out.
not terribly,
I mean, I think in Moortown, yeah, I wasn't on the select board then, but like the select board didn't sign it, I don't think, I think. we
yours
just-
was an update. In
It was,
Moortown.
it was an update, yeah,
Yeah, okay.
and I think it was not quite as delinquent as this one, but it was like in the ballpark, you know?
It's a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter, it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, what's the difference between like 10 and 13, yeah, it's like.
Nothing really.
Yeah,
It's
it,
so fine.
especially if you're not trying to like do something at that exact moment.
right,
But yeah, I don't think the select board signed it, I think, maybe they did, I don't know, I think we just presented it and they're like, okay, great,
yeah,
whatever, you know. So,
so anyway. That's the word from the select board, so yeah, let's stick with the August, the August Conservation Commission meeting, and that by then we will all have had an opportunity to work on it, and we'll get you back here, and we'll get a date on the calendar for a gathering in Cullen Barn. What's your fall?
so is that, wait, so is it the third Wednesday or the fourth Wednesday, ever,
It's
That,
the last Wednesday, okay, sweet.
It's the 27th.
27th.
here,
Oh, yeah, I'm sure I'll be here.
okay,
So sorry, my September schedule. Oh, I have no idea, I mean, I'll be around, but
okay,
yeah,
well, we
I
can
think,
coordinate
yeah,
on that.
yeah, yeah, I don't have any plans to go anywhere,
Okay,
so.
great,
yeah, that's good talk, thank you.
Yeah, I
Thank
appreciate.
Thanks, Michael.
yeah,
Thanks,
thanks a
guys.
lot,
Yeah, you too,
for
Kyle.
sure.
And then, yeah, just, and I didn't say, like, in, 1962 ortho. Like, if you look at it, it's like a little, not in the exact right place, so like I. Like, put those there, like, they're not georeferenced, so I georeference in them. And it's like hard, cause you're taking something and you warp it. And so I might mess around a little bit more, but if you look at it, you'll notice like boundaries right next to the road. So. Just when you look at it and you're like, okay, like, why does this look funky, that's why. Sometimes it's hard to get them perfect,
Fair warning.
so.
And then the border was from Vermont Center Geographic Information, is that where the border of the parcel came from?
So. Yeah, that's where I got that, but then I GPSed corners.
Yeah.
Most of the corners were like right on. So if I get to a corner and it's like within 15 or 20 feet, that's like what my handheld is, so I don't take a GPS point, but if it's like more than that, then I take it.
Yeah.
So I incorporated a couple points, but most of them were like right there, so.
Cool.
Well, it's 7 minutes after 7, so I would propose that we bring the meeting to an end, and if there's any important questions about projects, I guess email each other to find out what's going on. Looks good with that.
Yeah, it's okay with me.
Um,
Go for a swim at Boyce and try the new steps.
Oh,
Yeah,
It's a really pleasant way to get into the pond now.
I'll bet, you know, if it's slip and slide. And
You don't have to worry about, the last final step over that
So,
And I'll-
caving in bank or anything.
Like,
Oh,
in the
yeah.
car and the spreader, so if you want me to go do it, I'm happy to go do it,
That'd be great.
or meet whoever and.
quick
Take
meeting
direction.
to, motion to adjourn, because then I can.
Yeah, I second that.
I can end this, but.
All right. Looking forward to the read.
I motion we adjourn.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
okay.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.
Well,
Have a good evening.